Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' The Amateur. When his wife is murdered, Charlie Heller, the CIA's most brilliant computer analyst, must trek across the globe and use his only weapon, his intelligence, to hunt down her killers and enact revenge. Starring Academy Award winner Rami Malek and Academy Award nominee Lawrence Fishburne. The Amateur. Rated PG-13. Only in theaters April 11th.
Hey, where you been? Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means, that's Stefan Krajisnik, and that's Andrew Gillis coming to you after Ohio State's 2025 Pro Day. 17 participants, that's the 15 guys who were invited to the NFL Combine, plus G. Scott and Josh Fryer also went as well. I don't think anybody, that's not true. Ty Hamilton was the only person who did literally every single drill, I think. No, G. Scott did as well. But mixture of a day, it's not the most entertaining day, right, Stefan? It's not like, it's a lot of standing around and watching people work out in shorts and a t-shirt. So we're not learning a whole lot, but there are some takeaways here. Stefan is still not completely 100%. He's on a snap count. So I'm going to try to limit how much he's talking on this podcast. But I do want you to start, Stefan, with who do you think, based off of what we saw, and then obviously we have the numbers in front of us of how guys tested, who do you think helped themselves the most on Wednesday afternoon?
I think it might have been Will Howard. He had 2 incompletions out of the 67 passes he threw. I thought the deep ball, he was really successful. We saw a few to Brandon Ennis, and especially one to Travion Henderson, where we were like, wow. He looked the part of an NFL quarterback, and he spoke like one afterwards. I think we saw a different level of confidence than we saw from him at the Combine. We saw confidence from him throughout his time at Ohio State. And at the Combine, I think it was kind of toned down a bit. And now back at the Woody, he was talking about himself being the best quarterback in this class. And he believes that. And he said, if you don't believe that, then why are you doing this? But I think between how we played and what he said afterward, there was a lot for him to prove after some of the backlash after the Combine. And I think he did it. And will that make him a first-round pick? I don't know. Probably not. But there's still this conversation of who's going to be the third quarterback in this class. And I think he's firmly in that.
Andrew, it's crazy what happens when you're throwing the receivers that you've actually established a relationship with, huh?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that, I think, in one of our videos after one of the availabilities this week, where we said that Will Howard was probably, maybe the easy answer, but he was also probably the guy where you looked at and you said, all right, you need to improve your stock, because I don't think anybody would say that his Combine was great, right? I don't know if anybody was going to sit there and say, oh, he looked amazing at the Combine. But I think he certainly looked better. That to me, I think was probably the number one thing. He certainly looked improved from what he put on the field at Lucas Oil, I guess like a month ago at this point. It certainly looked like he was, more confident. Like there was a throw he made, I believe it was to Ennis down the far sideline from where we were standing. And then I don't even remember what song was on, but he like played the air guitar, like in between reps. He like threw the pass, did the air guitar thing. And then like 5 seconds later was like lining up the next receiver, like ready to go. I think he just felt more comfortable in his own environment. I think he felt comfortable. I don't think there was like a Zach Wilson moment of a pro day with him where it was like, oh my God, he rolled to his left and threw it 80 yards. He needs to be the number 2 pick in the draft. There wasn't that, but I thought Will certainly looked a lot better than he did in Indianapolis. And I think that did help him. I think it does, again, it helps when it's not even like the receivers that he was thrown to in Indianapolis were scrubs. It's just a comfortability thing, I think, right? The guys he's thrown to in Indianapolis are going to be NFL players. Of course, Ohio State, these are first round picks, second round picks, third round picks, whatever you want to say. Like, these are guys that are high quality receivers. He's in his own environment. He's in his own scheme. He's thrown to a familiar face. He's thrown to familiar hands. I just thought comfortability was probably the thing that probably let him have a fairly solid day throwing the ball.
He has familiarity with the receivers, and they just so happen to all be NFL level receivers. Like, seriously, you can make a case that all 3 of the guys, really all 4 of the guys he was throwing to, are, if you ranked every receiver who was at the NFL Combine and you threw these 4 guys in there, I think they all make the top 40 of the list. That's what we're talking about here, because that's what Ohio State receivers are here. I don't know if Will Howard helped himself on Wednesday. I just know he didn't hurt himself on Thursday. I don't, like, to Andrew's point, we didn't learn anything new. And I think part of the issue is the last 3 Ohio State pro days that featured quarterbacks were guys who were trying to use it to convince the world why they should be the number 1 pick to different extents, right? Dwayne Haskins going through it in 2019. Maybe Justin Fields to a lesser extent, because it felt like Trevor Lawrence was the consensus number 1, so he was trying to solidify himself as number 2. CJ was battling Bryce Young, I remember, in 2023, and the Panthers brought the entirety of their organization, like all the owners were here. It was like a thing, right? It was an event. I don't know if Will Howard's pro day was an event. It was just one of a lot of things happening, but I think he proved his point. He can be an accurate quarterback who can make all the throws, but I don't know if I left today thinking, oh, Will Howard, if he was going to be the 76th pick in April, I don't think I left today thinking, oh, he's going to be the 24th pick in the NFL draft. But I guess we'll have to see how the 30. I think he kind of missed out on the early buzz because none of them participated in the Senior Bowl because, I don't know, they were too busy competing in Rose Bowls and Cotton Bowls and national championship games. So he kind of missed out on some of the window there, but I don't think he hurt himself more than it is he didn't help himself. Andrew, who's another guy who maybe helped himself on Wednesday afternoon?
Some of the, we actually, we just have these numbers in front of us right now. I think Emeka maybe didn't help himself as much as he wrote it in Sharpie. So I guess maybe that's helping yourself, but I guess maybe he did help himself. I think solidifying yourself is helping yourself, right? If that makes any kind of sense. Like, I don't think Emeka Egbuka ran out there today and went, oh my goodness gracious, this guy is going to be maybe we shouldn't talk about him as a first round pick. Maybe we should talk about him as the first Ohio State player off the board. Maybe we should talk about him as the top 15 pick. I don't think he did that, but I thought he ran pretty well. He weighed in at 201. His vertical jump was 38. That's pretty good. He's listed right here as a hand-timed 4.45 Like, that's good. And one of the scouts, I know Dane Brugler reported this, one of the scouts had him at a 4.48, and Steven pulled this up when we were standing on the side. A 4.48 is exactly what Jackson Smith and Jigba ran a few years ago. And JSN was the 20th overall pick, I believe, by the Seahawks. It's like, okay, we're talking about Emeka being, wide receiver, off the board? Like, Ted McMillan's probably going to go ahead of him. And then you start.
He's 3, right? The consensus has Ted 9, Matthew Golden from Texas 19, and Emeka at 30.
Right. So it's like, I think I certainly feel, pretty solidified of Emeka being a top 32 pick after today. I don't know if you want to classify that as he shot up the draft boards or whatever. And I don't know how much really shooting up the draft boards there is with a month left to go before the NFL draft, especially before the first round. But I think right now you just kind of need to prove time and time again and be consistent in time and time again in who you are. And I think Emeka did that today.
Jackson had a weaker wide receiver class, at least the way people viewed it, right? There wasn't a 6'5" dude that everybody thinks is the next Drake London. And there wasn't a guy in that 23 class who did what Matthew Golden did at the NFL Combine, where he shut up draft boards because he ran a crazy 40 time. His official time, 4.45, so that's 0.03 seconds faster than what Jackson ran as wide receiver 1 2 years ago. But it's also, he's a slot receiver. So 201 pounds. He didn't do a height, which I think is interesting. He said, nah, you guys don't need to know how tall I am. 38-inch vertical, which I think is pretty impressive. His 10-yard split is 1.5. I think that's more important than the overall 40 when you're talking about slot receivers. Here's my question, and we're going to do a prediction in a couple of weeks here heading into the draft of where we actually think these guys are going to get drafted. Right now, Stefan, yes or no, do you think Ohio State's wide receiver first-round draft pick streak continues with Emeka Egbuka?
Yes.
Andrew, do you think it continues?
I do.
I'm a little nervous. And it's not about he's a first-round talent. That's not the conversation. But when you're talking about wide receiver threes in a weaker wide receiver draft where wide receiver 3 is already in the consensus at number 30 and his peak position is 20, I get nervous that he turns into T. Higgins in 2020, where T. Higgins is an awesome wide receiver who literally went 33rd. So technically he's not a first-round draft pick, but does that mean he wasn't good enough to go on day one? No, he was good enough to go on day one. It's just the teams at the bottom of the first round didn't need a wide receiver, so he didn't go. So I am nervous that he becomes T. Higgins, where depending on the needs of picks 20 through 32, he could go anywhere from 20 to 41.
So that's in it, yeah. And I talked earlier in this offseason basically saying, like, I think if you want Emeka Egbuka to come out there and be your number one, this is a top 10 receiver in all of football, like this guy is a game breaker. I don't know if you're going to get that from him, but I think he's going to be really, really good for a long time. And I am starting to think to myself, like, okay, man, like we just saw it in state. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins just got the bag. And I'm starting to wonder if some of these NFL teams, and this is an NFL conversation, but like I'm starting to wonder if NFL teams maybe value that 5th year of a rookie deal and getting that in the first round a little bit more, especially with a receiver, because then you kind of keep them cost controlled for 5 years, whereas T. Higgins, he was the 33rd overall pick, like you were saying, but hey, guess what? T. Higgins only had 4 years because he was 33rd and not 32nd. So I am wondering if not only, hey, maybe a team moves up, but like you just look at the end of the first round and it's like, okay, I know the Rams just signed Devontae, but I mean, you have Puka and Devontae's a little bit older. He's an option there. Houston, you don't think reuniting him with CJ Stroud is fun? Baltimore, I mean, they are always in search of receivers. Detroit might be okay. Washington just got Debo. Like there's options there. Buffalo, Kansas City, there's options at the end of the first round. And I think there are going to be teams that are looking at it going, man, we could really help our quarterback here and we could get 5 years of, even if it's not number one receiver play, I think you're looking at really good production from even a number 2 receiver. And I think we have seen the value of that with like Philadelphia. I mean, Philadelphia had A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and they just won the Super Bowl. And I know they won the Super Bowl because they're ferocious on both lines of scrimmage, but I think that might matter a lot. And I am starting to think that maybe teams are going to look at it, especially maybe a team with a younger quarterback or a team, that is looking to kind of take that next step of, man, what if we just had another playmaker? And Emeka is probably that guy. I mean, do you want to make the case for Luther Burden? I think maybe if somebody wanted to, I think Luther Burden's really good, but Emeka would be that guy at the end of the first round that you're looking at going, okay, maybe this is the spot for him at 29. I don't know if you're going to have an easy, like if you were to say his over under draft stock is 32.5, over is 33 and above, obviously. I think we're going under. I don't think it's going to be a comfortable under, but I do think we're going under.
Why can't he be a wide receiver one? I mean, based off what? Because his comparison in terms of NFL draft prospect is literally Jackson Smith-Njigba, who last year only had like 686 yards playing with an offensive coordinator who had no idea what to do with three really good wide receivers with him, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett, and all of them kind of suffered from it. And they have been public about that. 100 catches for 1,000 yards this year and 6 touchdowns. Like, why? I think the slot receiver 10 years ago, I'm with you, Andrew, is probably at best your second best guy. But I think Emeka can be as good as Emeka wants to be in the NFL. And the Seattle Seahawks just showed us what can happen with a slot receiver. You can get the Rams won a Super Bowl putting a guy in the slot and then just let them catch everything, right? Puka playing in this. I don't think my issue with Emeka is his ceiling or his talent level. I think it's more, what do NFL teams want? And maybe he's a victim of, Ohio State's wide receiver first round draft pick streak ends on a technicality because instead of being the 27th pick, because nobody needed a wide receiver for the last hour and a half on day one, the first 25 minutes of day two, a bunch of guys needed a receiver. And I'm just wondering if he's falling into that category because there isn't a Marvin Harrison Jr., there isn't a Jamar Chase, there isn't a Devontae. There's not a surefire, like, you should take this guy with a top 15 draft. And there's not a bunch of them. So teams might wait on Emeka because you can get him in the second round because you don't have to hurry up and take a wide receiver early.
What if someone jumps on him earlier than we think, though? What if his draft spot isn't 25 to 33? What if it's the Colts at 14? They need a receiver.
I think they should. And that's why I think he helped himself because he didn't do anything spectacular, but he validated what we already thought about him. So what does that? It's essentially, and all players said, the ball is in the NFL's court now, right? Does a team go, okay, he's everything we thought we were. We're going to take him with the 16th pick. Or does he fall into this isn't a deep wide receiver class. We don't need to jump on one with the 21st pick. We can wait until pick 47 to do it. And it doesn't change the way we view Emeka Egbuka at all. It's just about the way the draft kind of crumbles at the end of the day.
It just takes one team,
right?
It takes one team early jumping on Luther Burden. And then suddenly, if you're picking 25th, you're like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
I better take Emeka now.
Yeah. That's probably because Emeka's 30 in the consensus. Luther Burden is 33rd. And I do think those two impact each other because the earlier one goes, the earlier the other one's going to go, I think. And it's just, he's the first in this line of receivers that they've had who is clearly a first-round talent, who you can have this conversation about, okay, is it actually going to be a reality that he's going to be a first-round draft pick? Because Marv was wide receiver 1. Garrett and Chris blew everybody away at the combine, so that just was what it was. And there's always wide receivers that get taken in the first round. And so Jackson being the best of a weaker draft class, at some point he was going to come off the board. Emeka is Jackson with a top 10 wide receiver in his draft. He's if Jackson was in the same draft class as Marvin. And I'm not saying Ted is as good as Marvin. I'm just, you understand? There's a difference between pluck that guy in, we're going to take him with the 7th pick and run our offense through him, versus let's take this guy a little bit later. He's wide receiver 2 in year 1. And then maybe we give him a little bit more going forward, which is what Jackson Smith-Njigba was. But I think he helped himself by not hurting himself, which I feel like is the entire Emeka Egbuka story. He's always been very, very good, but nobody wants to go to the moon with him. And maybe I'm ready to go to the moon. Maybe I'm where Andrew was last May when we were all talking about Jeremiah Smith. He's like, guys, Emeka is really, really good. I think that's where I'm at with it. I'm going to take a flyer guy. I think Jordan Hancock really helped himself. I knew he was a good athlete. I didn't know he was this good of an athlete. 6'1", 186 pounds, 41.5-inch vertical jump, which is nuts. That's the best of anybody who participated on Wednesday. A 4.42 40 time, a 10 a 10 feet 6 inch broad jump. I don't know, man. Like, I know we're already talking, Stefan, about he's going to be a hard guy to replace. Wednesday just showed me why he's going to be such a hard guy to replace and why they were able to do so much of the stuff that they were able to do with him the last 2 years.
Yeah, he's versatile and he's athletic. I think maybe we forgot about that part. We talk about the different positions he can play. And when you see him run and you see some of the stuff he does, you're like, he's still like a very good athlete too. Like, just because you're versatile doesn't mean you're not athletic. Maybe it means the opposite. So I do think he helped himself today. He looked pretty good in some of the drills. I'm interested to see what NFL teams do with him. He talked a bit afterward and was saying, kind of the same stuff we said of teams have envisioned putting him multiple different spots. So it's going to be interesting not only see where he goes, but when he does land somewhere and you kind of have that post-draft press conference with coaches, like to see what that team thinks they can do with him is going to be really interesting.
So, and I mean, I don't think anybody's going to think Jordan Hancock is going in the first round. I don't even think anybody's going to look at him and say he's a top 64 pick. But once you get into like the third, fourth round, which is probably where he'll go, once you start to get into that mix, what do you start to hear from coaches? And what do you start to look for, at least early? Special teams contributor. What helps on special teams, obviously? Athleticism. Special teams contributor and versatility. And I don't look, I would need to go maybe scout a little bit more of the third, fourth, fifth round corners in this draft to have an understanding of what they could do. But I know Jordan Hancock's right on that list in terms of guys that you can move around and guys that you can play in a lot of different spots. And I bet you that has him maybe higher than some people think on some people's boards, not just because of how athletic he is and, the position he could play, but you mentioned the versatility. It's like, okay, year one, you're talking, even if he, hey, we're going to draft him and, hopefully we can develop him into a starting, even if it's a nickel in a year. It's like, all right, he's going to be our starting nickel in 2026. It's like, okay, well, in year one, you're probably going to get really good special teams contributions from him. You're going to get a good, solid depth corner where he might be your fourth corner, third corner on the roster. And then midway through the year, if a safety goes down, he's your third safety or your fourth safety too, right? Like he's the guy that you can move around. And tell me that doesn't sound enticing for an NFL team. Tell me that doesn't sound enticing for an NFL coach when you're talking about a third or a fourth round pick, right? When you're talking about a mid-round guy who can do all of those different things, that's what matters. Like when you get to the end of the draft, it's like, oh, it's the guys who aren't as athletic, or like once you really get through the first two rounds, it's like the guys who aren't as athletic, or there's an injury history, or they come from a small school. Like there's always something there when you get to the mid rounds. But I'm just kind of struggling to think like, okay, he might not be the number one corner like in this draft. Like there's a lot of other really good corners, but there are so many things that an NFL team could do with him and so many things that an NFL team would love to have him on their roster for. So yeah, I think Jordan Hancock might just be one of those guys where it's like, man, he's going to show up and some defensive coordinator and some defensive backs coach is going to be very, very happy in the NFL.
Okay, let's take a break and we can name a couple other guys here on Buckeye Talk.
At Patron, we craft our tequila using high-quality natural ingredients without additives. No sweeteners, no extracts, no secrets. In fact, Patron's secret ingredient is that we have no secret ingredients. Just 100% additive-free tequila, made with 100% Weber Blue Agave, water, and thyme. Patron, 100% additive-free tequila. Visit patrontequila.com to learn more. The perfect way to enjoy Patron is responsibly. Copyright 2025, imported by Patron Spirits Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Tequila 40% ABV.
It's time for basketball, and Uber Eats is dropping deals on game day favorites to keep you locked in on the action. Like when you're craving a buzzer beater, but also buffalo wings. Or when an upset makes you want to ugly cry into a pizza. And right now, Uber Eats has game day deals from McDonald's, Popeyes, Pizza Hut, Wendy's, and hundreds more local favorites. So you can keep your eyes on the ball and your hands on a hamburger. Order now, only on Uber Eats. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
And we're back on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means, Andrew Gillis in a snap count for Stefan Krajisnik, trying to keep it low, kind of keep his words to a minimum. Hopefully, by the end of this week, he's back. As you're listening to this, we're back in the Woody for a fourth straight day, talking with the linebackers and talking with the tight ends. It's Arvo Reese day, so I think Stefan's going to get healthy because we got to talk to Arvo Reese tomorrow. Got a chance to talk with Max Clare and a bunch of other guys as well. So get the text 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. Andrew, you're up again. Who else helped themselves during Pro Day?
It's a good question. I don't think. Well, so I guess he helped himself. Tyler Williams didn't get hurt. He tweeted that he was cramping. Because we saw him, just for clarification. He said he's fine. He tweeted out earlier in the day that he is okay. We saw him go down during the 40, and we all just kind of went, "Oh no," because you see him go down, and it didn't look great at first. I thought Cody looked pretty smooth in his running. Obviously, some of those numbers, he ran a 4.59 40. Obviously, that's hand timed. You look at, what did he weigh in at? He was 232. Like, I think Cody is that. For everything I just said about Jordan Hancock, I think Cody is that guy, is just the model of consistency when you talk about the end of the draft, because at the end of the draft, there's obviously something there that has not let you go to the first or second round. It doesn't always have to be like a super negative thing. It can just be like, hey, there's a guy who's more athletic, or hey, there's a guy who blah, blah, blah. And sometimes they just miss. And I think Cody, though, is that guy who he ran well enough at 232 to where you can start to say, like, okay, well, 33.5-inch vertical, 21 reps on the bench, like that's pretty solid. And that's enough that you need to see from a guy who you're not asking to come in and be your starting linebacker from day one. Cody Simon is like your perfect 5th, 6th round pick. He is just your perfect guy for that role. He was a, captain, team leader. He was just the guy that you want at the end of the draft. Like, there was a player, I think, I forget what year this was with Ohio State, but it was Evan Spencer, who didn't really do a whole. I know he had that great touchdown pass to Michael Thomas in the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, but like, he got drafted in the 7th round solely for his special teams and his leadership. And I know his NFL career didn't really pan out, but like, Cody Simon's got all that, and he can play some ball. And I think he definitely kind of solidified today that he looks smooth when he runs. I think he can run maybe a little bit better than people think. And I just, when you look at him run, it looks natural. And that, to me, I thought was a big deal for him today. So I thought Cody Simon had a nice little day.
What about you, Stefan? Who else?
Donovan Jackson looked pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
He was looking pretty smooth in some of the drills the offensive linemen were doing with Tyler Bowen. He actually said that he reached out to Bowen, asked if he would do the offensive lineman drills for himself and Josh Fryer, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if today really changed a whole ton. I just thought he looked good. And I think he's such an intriguing prospect because of the different things he can do. He had maybe one of my favorite quotes of, we look at them as NFL prospects and you forget that they're just college graduates sometimes.
Unemployed.
And he literally goes, yeah. He was asked about, whether teams see him as a tackle, as a guard, what the situation is. And he said, some teams see me in some spots, some teams see me in other spots, some teams see me in spots that I've never played before. I just want to get a job, or I just need to get a job. And that was cracking me up. I thought it was pretty good. He might be the most intriguing prospect of the 17 for me, just because if teams view him as a tackle, how high can he go? And if teams view him as a guard, I think he's still in the first round conversation. So, like, whatever you view him as, I think he's a first-round prospect. And we'll see what it looks like. Stephen, we were talking about it earlier. It's an interesting class of tackles because there's some teams that aren't sure if a lot of these tackles are tackles.
Yeah.
And if you're telling yourself, man, this guy, Will Campbell, for example, from LSU, if you're a GM looking at this guy telling yourself, I think he might be more of a guard than he is a tackle, and you're talking about him changing positions, well, then why not just take the guy who showed you that he can play both and figure it out? Like, Donovan might be a sleeper, like, top 15 pick that we're not talking about. Like, Emeka, we know, could go top 15 if some things fall his way, right? Josh Simmons, we know, can go top 20 if some things fall his way. Donovan's not really in that conversation. But if this is how people are talking about some of the other tackles in the class, why can't he go higher?
So
He's an athletic freak.
Donovan Jackson today, I think he didn't do any like on-field testing. I don't think. Or no, he did. He did like he did the shuttle. Yeah, he did. He did some. He didn't do the 40. But that was what it was. He didn't do the 40, but weighed in at 317. Blah blah blah. But the most interesting thing, his wingspan is 83 inches and his arm length is 34 and a half. Will Campbell, for as much as we talk about his arm length, everybody's like, well, you need to hit that like 33 mark, right? So I have like some of the NFL numbers. So what is that? 83 for Donovan Jackson and then 34 and a half inch arms. Longer arms than Kelvin Banks. Longer wingspan and longer arms than Will Campbell. Connerly from Oregon, people are talking about him at the end of the first round. Longer arms, longer wingspan. I know the kid from Missouri tested out of the gym, so like we'll see. Like I say all that to be like the guys that we talk about here as being tackles, and obviously just because you got long arms doesn't mean you're a good tackle. But it helps. And it certainly helps. And when you look at some of these other guys, it's like, okay, he's got like he had a longer wingspan than Membu from Missouri. I believe that's how you pronounce that. Like some of these guys, you start to map it out and go, well, maybe Donovan Jackson isn't as tall, but he makes up for it with his arm length. And arm length is really, really important. I always laugh because it's like, hey, we talk about 40 times for offensive linemen, and we talk about all these numbers that don't really matter. Arm length and hand, like there's certain things like hand size for a quarterback is really important. Like arm length and wingspan, especially for a tackle, are really, really important because you start to say like, oh, if you're under this, if you're under like 33, that was the big number for Will Campbell. I remember he tested in, I believe he hit 33 at arm length today at LSU for his pro day. So for him, it's like, oh, well, he hit the benchmark. He did what he needed to do. People are still talking about him as a guard. It's like, I think Donovan Jackson, him just being that lengthy gives you a lot of options. And it's a little bit like Jordan Hancock in that conversation where it's like, hey, maybe he's just a guard with really long arms, and maybe he's just a guy you just want to say like he's our guard and blah blah blah, and maybe he's also a tackle. Like maybe he's just that guy where you say Ohio State had the formula correct. We think he's a better guard, but he's also our third tackle. And if something goes wrong, we're moving somebody into the interior and Donovan's kicking out to tackle. Maybe that's the plan because he's certainly got the measurements that let you know that, okay, this guy might be an NFL tackle, even if it's guard first, but he's got what you're looking for.
So can we argue for a second?
What
and
else,
Stefan? You can chime in if you need to, but again, snap count, pitch count here. So I don't know if you guys remember this conversation the first time we ever talked about the draft heading into the combine, where Stefan, you and I brought up that idea of Donovan Jackson being a first-round draft pick, and our lovely co-host Andrew essentially shot it down like we were crazy to even suggest that he could be maybe the first tackle taken off the board. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But what I do know is this. Andrew, we told you so. Here is the basis of the argument. Both of you have already kind of said it in different ways. They always talk about true tackles, right? True tackle size and whatnot. And for whatever it's worth, right? True tackle size is what? Like 6'5" and above, 315 and above with long wingspan and all those different things. I do not think there is a true tackle in this class. A guy where he's definitely going to play tackle. And I think that's what these pro days and the combine have been showing, is that there's a lot of guys in this draft who can play tackle, but they don't have to just truly be tackles. They could move inside, which is where the Will Campbell conversation comes from. I don't think it's going to happen, but if Donovan Jackson is the first offensive lineman who comes off the board because he's testing out the wazoo like this, and there's not like a true tackle, I wouldn't be surprised. His arm length is longer than Trent Williams' was. And that's what the name I brought up with when I was talking about undersized guys who maybe they have something else that makes up for the fact that maybe they're not the biggest tackles in the world. Donovan Jackson's arm length is 34 and a half. Trent Williams's was 34 and a quarter. And that's just part of the equation there. But I'm with you guys. I think Donovan Jackson is creeping up draft boards. It's just mock drafts haven't caught up to it yet. And if Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell and the kid from Missouri aren't like surefire true tackles, and Josh Simmons is simply just traits, even if he didn't have to play a single game this year where he had to prove those traits were worth anything. That's how Donovan Jackson, who by no fault ended up having to go through the gauntlet that Josh Simmons would have had to go to had he not been had he been fully healthy. That's how Donovan Jackson becomes a top 15 draft pick, because people aren't just looking at him as just a guard anymore. They're looking at him as an offensive lineman. And what if he's the best pure offensive lineman in the draft?
I have 2 points to make. I kind of, in a weird way, the snap count injury thing is working for me. I feel like sometimes I talk fast and I think I'm enunciating more. So maybe our listeners actually like this. My first point is we view Donovan Jackson as a guard who showed you that he's a damn good tackle. All it takes is for one NFL team to evaluate him and say, we're putting him on our draft board as a tackle. We're not even talking about guard. And if you think he's the best tackle, he's going to go super high, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't even talk about him as a guard. All it takes is one team to say he's a tackle, and that's the end of the conversation for them. Second point, what if maybe it's not a point as much as it is a question. What if he came back? What if he had another season? He came back and Ohio State just said, that's our starting left tackle. And he played a full season at tackle. He put together 1.5 years as a tackle and looked just as good. Do you think he would be even higher on some of these boards? Because right now you have, 10 games of him playing? No, 9 games of him playing tackle? What if you had 25 games of him playing tackle? What does that conversation look like?
I mean, in hindsight, maybe he should have just been their left tackle. Maybe when Paris went pro, they went out and got Josh Simmons, who had been playing right tackle and was one of the most penalized right tackles in college football at San Diego State. What if they just decided, hey, Donnie, you're going to play left tackle now, and Josh Simmons is going to be our right tackle, and we'll figure out guard, because they've had plenty of depth at guard, apparently. What if Austin Saravel this past year was just their starting left guard? Donovan Jackson was playing left tackle and Josh Simmons was playing right tackle. In hindsight, you shouldn't have batted an eye at it. Maybe he would be considered a top 10 draft pick right now if he'd spent the past 2 years of his life playing left tackle. What's more impressive than Ohio State going from, in a Ryan Day era, going from Justin Fields to CJ Stroud, Ohio State going from Marvin Harrison Jr. to Jeremiah Smith, or Ohio State going from Nick Bosa to Chase Young, or Ohio State going from Paris Johnson to Donovan Jackson?
I think what's interesting too is, like, he got all these reps at guard, and he played so much guard. And when he made that change, a lot of people were wondering, like, is this going to hurt his stock? Was that silly to ever wonder? Because even if he sucked as a tackle, we knew he was a pretty good guard. And maybe he wouldn't be a first-round talent, but he's probably going second round as a guard. The only thing that he could have really done is boosted his draft stock. I think that's what he's done.
Probably.
Like, how bad could it have gone at tackle that you think, dang, that's a fourth-round guard now?
Probably not much, but I think it was less that and more just there is some physical differences you're at. Like they talked about, he had to drop like 15, 20 pounds because now you're playing in space versus, and you're like you're playing on the defense versus going and attacking, which is what guards get to play on offense and tackles get to play essentially on defense against edge rushers. So I guess you didn't want to have to physically make the change and then have to physically make the change back to guard when you're trying to. I don't know, but overall, you're probably right. There was no downside overall to Donovan Jackson's individual future for him making this decision. It just so happens that he maximized it the best possible way. I don't know. I just think this is a little bit more wide open than people think for things that don't actually matter. Quite frankly, I get it, arm length and all those things, but then Will Campbell came out and said today, nobody said anything about my arms for 2 years. I was a Sherlock top 15 draft pick. Now all of a sudden, someone took a tape measure to one side of my body, and now everybody's worried about me. So I do think you can't overthink it a little bit of what does the tape tell you? Well, the tape tells me that Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks are clearly number 1 and number 2 in whatever order you want to put them in. But is Donovan Jackson the third best offensive lineman from a pure pound for pound standpoint? I think you can make that case pretty easily, especially the numbers don't hurt him, but also more importantly, we watched him play football, Andrew. And that's what helps him the most is him showing I can be versatile and you can put me up against a potential number 1 draft pick in Abdul Carter and I'll play fine. James Pierce is a first round draft pick. I'll play fine. Texas has how many top 60 picks on their defensive line? He'll be fine. Notre Dame is a little banged up, but it's still an elite defense, and he was fine. So the overall point is these numbers should help you and never really hurt you. And I think Donovan Jackson, for much of the betterment of the last 4 to 5 months here, has been helping his case.
So I don't remember really. I mean, maybe I'll have to listen back. I don't remember really looking at you guys like you were crazy suggesting that Donovan Jackson could go like higher. I remember the big debate was the Will Howard in the first round debate where maybe some team goes nuts. And I was like, I don't think a team is going to go that nuts.
The Raiders exist, though, so you never know.
Well, the Raiders also pick 6, and Ashton Genty's going to be on the board when they pick. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, this offensive line class is really interesting to me. I think if I had to pick where Donovan Jackson goes, that like 28 to 40 range feels right. Maybe like 25 to 40 even. Because you mentioned Campbell and Banks. Teams really like that Membao, I don't know how to pronounce that name. I do apologize, from Missouri, that tackle. Teams are very, very high on him. I know he's kind of shot up draft boards. I know the people that kind of cover this stuff for a living have talked about how much teams really like him. Josh Simmons is a guy that, I mean, how much have we talked about Josh Simmons and how much teams really maybe like him? And it's like, okay, well, if those are 4 guys, like Jackson might be the 5th, and then Tyler Booker from Bama. Like Tyler Booker from Bama might be the best guard in the draft, and I know he tested out the wazoo. I remember at the combine as well. In terms of I think his size and measurables and things like that. So like if you like Booker better, I think Donovan Jackson, if you're just looking for that guy's going to be really friggin' good for a really long time, and he's just going to be the problem solver on your offensive line, that to me helps him. I think certainly, where it's like, you know what, we're going to play him at guard, and maybe we play him at tackle, whatever we really need him at. Maybe it's a team sitting there and I don't know, team at 34, 35. I don't know who, whatever. Maybe there's trades, but it doesn't matter. It's like a team sitting there and it's like, you know what? We're good at tackle, but we need a guard, and Donovan Jackson fits that. And there's a team going, you know what? We've got a bunch of options at guard and tackle, and we're just going to put them all in training camp. We're going to see who plays best, and Donovan Jackson's going to get thrown into that mix as well. And we're going to see what comes out of the wash. That's an option as well. So I think Donovan Jackson is pretty clearly a top 40 pick. Like, I think that's his bare floor. But yeah, him sneaking up higher is not going to be crazy. Just because of that versatility and that maybe the different things you could do with him, because I think there are certain teams that draft and say, this guy is going to fit this particular role and this guy is going to be this particular guy. But there are also teams that can make the switch pretty quickly. I remember back in 2015, Washington drafted Brandon Sheriff and they tried him at right tackle for like 2 days and they're like, we're good. And they moved him in at guard. And guess what? That guy's been like a Pro Bowl guard for like 12 years. And I know he played in Jacksonville and a bunch of other places. It's like some teams just draft a guy because they're good. And I think that's why Donovan Jackson kind of has that potential first round pick ability ceiling. Like him being kind of in those late 20s, mid 30s is probably where I would expect him to go. Just because, again, there are a lot of other really good linemen that I think are interesting in this class. But Donovan's, he's right in that mix.
Two other guys, Lathan Ransom, I think helped his stock today. He didn't do any position drills today, but he did do testing. 4.53 40 time. Man, I wish his medical. If he didn't have 2 severe season-ending injuries on his medical sheet, I think this is a day 2 draft pick. When you look at his instincts, I think he probably did well in those meetings, and I think those testing numbers are fine for a guy who's a safety in the NFL. And then Ty Hamilton. There were 7 guys at the NFL Combine who ran a 40 time under 5 seconds. Ty Hamilton would have been among those. He would have been the 8th guy had he ran his 4.95 40 time at the NFL Combine. He's strong, 35 on the bench, which was the most of any Buckeye. Josh Simmons was second with 34 of them. He's a nose. And he's an Ohio State defensive lineman, which can sometimes get you the difference between maybe you're not drafted to now you're a 6th round draft pick. And I think a guy who has maybe been underrated for a lot of his career because he's been playing with JT Jack and Tyleek and Mike Hall for his entire career. I think somebody might take a flyer on him and they might get a guy who's very similar to his brother, Davon Hamilton, who got paid pretty well a couple of years ago. So I think he helped his stock as well as a guy who under the radar guy at the NFL Combine. I think he helped himself as well. 17 guys. Let's close with this. And we'll have a more concrete conversation about this in a couple of weeks when we're doing NFL draft prep. Right now, Andrew, best case scenario for Ohio State. Actually, that's not the best case. Let's just do flat out. Right now, of the 17, you don't have to name them. How many get drafted?
I think 16.
Okay.
I think it's Josh Fryer. I think Josh Fryer is the one guy that does not get picked. I think there is a team that pulls the trigger on G. Scott late.
Okay. Stefan?
I'm going to stick with 15.
Okay. 15 is a lot of people.
Tie the record.
Yeah. It would help if they had best case scenario. How many first round draft picks?
4. Best case scenario. Emeka, Simmons, and then some combination of Donovan, Jack, Quinshon, or Travion. Maybe JT.
JT looked good.
JT did look good. And Mike Tomlin looked impressed with JT.
Mike Tomlin's always.
I don't think the Steelers take him number 20, but
no.
2nd round maybe.
Mike Tomlin always looks impressed with the Ohio State guys until it's time to actually pick him in the first round. Best case scenario, Andrew, how many first round draft picks?
I think I want to say 4. And it's kind of cheating because I'm not really going to name the specifics. I think it's Emeka, Simmons, and then 2 of one of the running backs, Quinshon or Trey, Donovan, JT probably would be the edge rusher that a team would jump up and maybe take a chance on. So it's like,
So what I just said.
yeah, like I think it's 4, but there's that grouping that you could kind of convince me like, man, Quinshawn tested out the wazoo at the combine, and maybe a team is sitting there at 32 going, yeah, you know what? Let's just run the ball, and let's just live with Quinshawn, and let's take that 5-year deal and let's go. So I don't know. I don't know if you can put specific names on it because there's just a lot of ways that this can go.
That's why I didn't ask you for specific names. I just asked you for a number.
I know.
Decided to give names.
You start to think like best case scenario, but like it typically, I think when we do these conversations, it's like, you know, best case scenario, or you see like an over under for number of position players drafted in the first round, and it's like, okay, basically what you're asking is X player a first round pick? But I think in Ohio State's case, I think it's just like, are 2 of these 4 first round picks? Maybe.
I just asked for a number.
I know. I think 4 is best case.
Okay. Yeah, you two deciding to name those people. I was just going to ask for a number. I think 13 get drafted. And that might be me purposely trying to leave the Ohio. We're in the Ohio State bubble, and we're just like, oh, all these guys are going to get drafted. Well, that's never what happens. That everybody gets drafted. There's a world where all 17 of these guys get drafted. There's a world where 15. There's also a world where 10 of them get drafted, because there's a lot of good football players out there. So I'll say 12, because it just feels like the comfortable number right now. Because once you get 13, 14, 15, that's when teams have to start taking flyers, especially the longer it goes between guy number 2 and guy number 3 and guy number 4 and guy number 5 getting drafted, the less like wiggle room you have. Which is why I asked you guys best case scenario first round draft picks. Best case scenario first round draft picks, they have 5 if things swing the right way. And I'm not going to name those people because I don't want to do that. More than likely, they're going to have 2 first round draft picks. So that's where it starts. Can you get ahead? That's the thing about Georgia. They got ahead of it because they had like 5 first round draft picks. So it's okay. In the next 6 rounds, can you get 10 guys drafted? Versus if Ohio State has 1 first round draft pick, okay, can you have another 14 guys drafted over the next 48 hours? That's a hard thing to swing, but I guess we'll see. We'll get more into draft prep next month when Ohio State wraps up spring practice. We're back talking about the current players tomorrow. As I said, we're talking with linebackers and tight ends to wrap up this week as Ohio State continues to inch closer and closer to the spring showcase on April 12th, which Ryan Day said is going to be like a spring game, even if everybody doesn't play, a.k.a. Jeremiah Smith will not be playing in the spring game. I did ask him why he was not one of the participants of the guys who are returning: Carnell Tate, Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, Brandon Ennis, Bryson Rogers, and Lincoln Keenels all did participate. And it was the most, I could have told you that this was the answer. It's because they didn't want a circus when there doesn't have to be a circus. Because if he'd have gone out there, he'd have been the focus of literally everybody in the building. Media, coaches, everybody would have just been looking at JJ. And it's no reason to put him in that position when he still has another 48 months before he can even be considering this conversation right now.
I mean, even when he wasn't participating in pro days, we saw some coaches talking to him afterward.
Right. So it was obvious, because why create a circus when you don't have to? So maybe he'll go through it next year when he's 12 months removed from going through it. And that's what we've seen, because that's what happened today is all the guys who might be going through this a year from now were the guys they let participate in this. And Lincoln Keenholz participating in Julian Saying means nothing to the quarterback battle at all. Again, it's just upperclassmen getting the chance to experience something for the first time. So get the text 614-350-3315. Wait for trial $3.99. After that, we get back to talking current Buckeyes tomorrow, linebackers and tight ends, and then we'll continue things over the next couple of weeks here. For Stefan Krajisnik and Andrew Gillis, I'm Stephen Means, and that was Buckeye Talk.